the next segment, the circuit. And the first article is the one I consider leading this week with because it is a big news story, but maybe it isn't. And the maybe it isn't part I'll get to in a second.
Meta hit with record-breaking $1.3 billion fine over Facebook data transfers to the US.
$1.3 billion. I believe that's US dollars. I think it was 1.2 billion euro because this is a fine coming from the European Union.
That's right. And the EU has very, very strict regulations around their privacy laws, don't they?
10 years in the making. Right? This is
From 2013 or something.
the initial inciting incident was Edward Snowden
Right.
when he made his data leaks in 2013 about how the US surveillance program manages data of countries that it may or may not be allied with and uses that and incorporates it as part of its surveillance program for national security or other purposes. The EU is understandably quite uncomfortable with their citizens' data being stored in the US because if it's stored in the US, according to Edward Snowden, they're going to be able to, if not by default, request access to that data and do some deep dive on whether those citizens are guilty of certain crimes or are at risk of committing some kind of felony. They are able to do that kind of work and they do it routinely. The main sticking point here was that Meta or Facebook is one of the biggest platforms in the world. So it would have access to a huge amount of user data. Yes. And they were going back and forth trying to negotiate with the EU to say, look, we do need to store the data in the US because our government has a certain legislation. If we're based in the US, then we have to comply with that legislation. If you are not going to let us do that, then we're going to pull our platform out of the EU and not let your users have the fun that is Meta, the exhilaration that is using Facebook. All right. A little facetious there.
Even with a fine, it's not going to make much difference.
Maybe not that big a deal, or maybe not that big a story.
Unfortunately, I mean, it should be, but they're a huge company.
1.3 billion is a lot to most people, but to them it is a very, very small fraction, even as they continue laying off staff and their profits go down and up. But 1.3 billion isn't actually going to make that much difference to them, and assuming that they don't appeal and get a lot of that
back and forth.
So
it drags it out for years more.
So I don't think it's going to make that much difference to Facebook, but it does have some interesting ramifications for us as the end user because we can't control where our data is being stored, can we?
No, we can't. In a lot of cases, we don't know where it's being stored.
Yeah, so I didn't even know that this was a regulation of Facebook. I didn't know my data is being stored in the US. We in Australia,
I'm assuming it's the same thing, same case.
Same case. We're kind of stuck in no man's land because if we're not on these platforms, then we are quite disconnected from the online conversation. And that might be a good thing.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to, say, grow a podcast or produce educational content, you need global reach.
You need to be in the loop, don't you?
Yeah.
It's a difficult situation to be in.
And I'm actually in a very specific predicament because I don't know how much more I should keep using a platform like TikTok. I don't actually use Facebook that much for this content, but I do publish this content on YouTube, on Instagram, and on TikTok. But TikTok is getting banned in quite a lot of places. And in the US, a couple of states have banned it already, I believe. In Australia, we're constantly having conversations around banning TikTok. So I'm like, well, what do I do?
What is your most used platform, do you think?
Personally, I use YouTube the most. Yeah, I consume a lot of YouTube content. I publish videos on YouTube a lot.
Yeah.
It's probably by far the most common platform. What about you?
For me, Instagram.
And Instagram is Meta, so you definitely don't have a choice.
That's right. I don't publish, but I do enjoy an Instagram scroll.
We just don't have control as the end user of what happens to our data. And we've covered previously all of these data hacks and data leaks of these big companies. The hackers aren't going to go for our individual accounts. They're going to go for the big companies, and where they store their data is apparently not up to us, not even up to most governments.
I wouldn't even want to know. It would be scary to know. I saw a news article the other day where I think you could put in a few details and it would give you an idea of what it can piece together about details on you. And I was too scared to even look at it. Not to mention that I didn't want to put my details in it in the first place. But it's a bit redundant.
Was it a news article? Please enter your PIN and your social security number.
I want to say it was on ABC News.
Okay, not on like ABD News or something like that.
You got to be careful.
A close facsimile of ABC, ABD News. Do you remember, it was a few years ago where you just started getting an email from every single online store you've ever bought anything from telling you that we need to comply with new EU legislation, and if you want to keep receiving emails from us, you need to consent to it. Do you remember that period of time?
I don't remember that at all.
You don't remember
I have
all?
Zero recollection.
Maybe I do more online shopping of fancy indigo jackets than you do. That flurry of emails came because of this piece of legislation that was brought in, the GDPR.
General Data Protection Regulation.
General Data Protection Regulation. And this is what led to Facebook having to pay that $1.3 billion fine. The same thing that these e-commerce sites selling jackets overseas were worried about keeping my details on their server that's not based in the country.
Yep.
It's the same reason that Facebook got fined $1.3 billion. The thesis of this regulation is that the citizens should have a right to not have their data stored by the person who is requesting that data. Right. So even if you needed data to process a transaction, you should have the right to not have that stored indefinitely on someone's server.
I do feel like often data is collected that these stores really don't need. I mean, you get so many spam phone calls now and emails, and when I'm asked every time to put in my mobile phone number, why do you really need that?
And when we go and check out our grocery stores and supermarkets, they ask for your postcode. I'm always curious what happens to your postcode.
IKEA do that, don't they?
IKEA do it, grocery stores do it. They could see how far you've traveled to attend, to visit that grocery store, and then
Coles, Woolies
to go to a supermarket. I'm going to do a bit of digging. I'm sure it's for a very specific reason, a very insidious reason that they're collecting postcodes. Probably. And we'll find out in our last episode of the season.
Do you remember a couple of years ago, there was that article, I think it was it Target or Walmart in the US, supposedly predicted someone was pregnant before they knew themselves.
They predicted a family's teenage daughter was pregnant before the family knew and before the teenage girl knew, because of the type of products that they were buying.
That's right.
Was aggregated with pregnancy. But it was strange things that were aggregated. It wasn't like pregnancy tests.
Like prenatal vitamins.
Yeah. It was like obvious. It was like certain types of shampoos or like certain kind of dolls. It was something weird.
I remember being like shocked at the time, but now I just kind of go, oh, okay, fair enough.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Amanda.
Hope to connect with you again next time.